Let's talk really quickly about our setup here. Right now we have our functional component inside of our index.js. But remember, one of the main benefits of React is that we get to create a lot of our own components. Eventually, we're not going to be able to put everything right here in this file. So what we need to do is we need to take our myInfo component and move it into its own file. And it's a pretty good convention to have each file contain just one React component. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new file. And there's a quirk of Scrimba right now that you won't be able to see me typing this. But I'm going to right-click up here by Files and say New File. And a dialog box just popped up for me, and I'm going to give it the same name, myInfo, as my component with the same capital camel case and everything. And you should see it pop up here now. And notice that the file, myInfo, is spelled exactly the same with the same capitalization as my component. That's a really good idea because it will make things a lot easier for you when you're looking through a complex project tree. The next thing I need to do is take this component out of this file. So I'm going to cut it, go over to myinfo.js, and paste it in. Now there's a few issues here. You may remember in one of the early videos we talked about why we import React from React even though we're not using React anywhere. Try to think if you remember why that is. The reason we had to do that was because of our JSX. We used to have this component here and it contained JSX. The computer won't know what this is because it's not normally valid JavaScript, but the React library helps it become legitimate JavaScript, which means, let me undo that, back over in myinfo.js, anywhere we're going to be using JSX, we need to make sure to import React. Almost every React component you create is going to have this line in it. The last thing we need to do is make this function, myInfo, available to other places in my application. The way I need to do that is by exporting it. If you don't feel totally familiar with import exports from ES6, that should be okay as long as you remember this export default and then the name of your component. But I would also recommend that you go check out the free Introduction to ES6 course here on Scrimba. Now that this component is exposed through the export default, I'm going to go over to index.js. And let's just Command S. We'll save this and see what comes up. Notice it says my info is not defined. Well, that's because we used to be declaring that function here in this file and making an instance of it by putting these braces around it. But now we're not doing that. So we need to import my info from myinfo.js. Now it's really easy to forget that we can't just say myinfo.js. The reason is because when imports don't have a relative path, they will automatically look for a module with the same name that you're providing. This works okay with React and React DOM because they are third-party modules or dependencies that I've installed into this project. When it's one of my very own modules or one of my very own files, I need to make sure to provide a path. So I'm going to say /, which means from the current directory, look for a file called myinfo.js. Another important thing to know about imports is that they assume that you're importing a JS file, or in other words, .js is the default extension. So I can delete .js and it will still work just fine. Now if I refresh, I get my component back in the browser on the right. As your project gets more and more complex, it's going to be really important that you have a good organizational structure. One simple organizational structure I can employ right now is by creating a new folder called components, where I'm going to put all of my components in. So I'm going to create a new folder, call it components, and I'm going to drag my info.js into components. Now, looking back at index.js, what do you think I'll need to fix here? If you noticed that the path to my myinfo file is now incorrect because it's no longer inside of the root directory, I need to provide ./components/myinfo. And when I save this, everything should be working just fine. Having a components folder is, to me, a little bit of an oversimplified way to organize your application, because you're going to have so many components that you create that you're going to need to find a structure that works best for you. And I'm not going to offer one that works best. You'll probably even see me throughout this course using a few different types. But each person has their own opinions about what the best organizational structure is, and it definitely depends on the project as well. Before moving on, try playing with this a little bit. Maybe go change some code inside of myinfo, or maybe move it into another folder, or change the file name and see what you need to fix in order for everything to keep working. Or if you're really wanting to be forward thinking, you're welcome to try and create a new component and nest that inside of myinfo. But this is actually what we're going to cover in the next lesson. Once you feel comfortable with everything we've talked about here, let's move on.